Hey, everybody, and welcome to our show. I am Liz, joining you as usual from Central Virginia and the unceded lands of the Monacan Nation, and I am so glad that you are here with me today. And before we dive in, I want to remind you that my new book, Home to Her, Walking the Transformative Path of the Sacred Feminine, will be available beginning October 14th, 2022, very close now, from Womancraft Publishing.
Mm.
This book is my love letter of sorts to the sacred feminine. It includes all kinds of historical insights, plus my personal experiences and some revelations that I've received from guests on this very show. So you can learn more. You can order it at womancraftpublishing.com. And of course, it will be available via Bookshop, Amazon, etc., as well. And now, without further ado, let's get on with our show. So, as you might imagine, I get pretty excited when I find other podcasts and books that are exploring similar themes that I'm talking about here. Or maybe you wouldn't imagine that. Maybe instead you have been misled by the patriarchal hoo-ha that women are catty and don't support each other. Nah, right? If you're listening to the show, you probably know that that's a whole lot of BS. And some of the most delightful and unexpected surprises of this journey with the sacred feminine have been these connections that I've forged with others who are writing and talking and speaking about the sacred feminine, all coming from different perspectives. It is such a good perk to this gig, and my guests today and the podcast that they host definitely fit this bill. So I actually found out about them through the Home to Her Facebook group that I host. Some of the members there were sharing and talking about this podcast called Make Matriarchy Great Again. So of course I had to check it out, and here we are today. So let me go ahead and introduce my guests to you, who represent two of the three hosts of the show. Dawn Alden has spent almost 30 years in the nonprofit art space, both as a performer and as an administrator. She founded and ran her own nonprofit theater company for 10 years, worked in development and fundraising for various arts organizations, runs a film production company, and is founding a church. She has a long history of feminist activism in the arts and is dedicated to creating work by and about women for everyone. 34 Circe Salon, Make Matriarchy Great Again podcast is her pandemic lockdown project. It's funny because this podcast started right before the lockdown too. She is joining us today from her home in Los Angeles, California. And also joining us is feminist artist, writer, healer, and teacher, and I'm adding legend because she is to me, Vicki Noble. Vicki is the co-creator of Motherpeace and author of 8 books, including Motherpeace, A Way to the Goddess, Shakti Woman, Feeling Our Fire, Healing Our World, which is a handbook for women healers, and The Double Goddess, Women Sharing Power, a survey of the long lineage of Amazons and yoginis since time immemorial, which is currently sitting on my bookshelf right now. Vicki co-created with Karen Vogel the round feminist Motherpeace tarot cards, revisioning both divination and world history to include women and people of color. In 2017, the fashion company Christian Dior licensed the Motherpeace images for a special clothing line, sending their matriarchal values out to all the urban centers of the world. For decades, she has traveled and taught internationally and led pilgrimage groups to sacred goddess sites around the world. She's also retired from teaching as a graduate professor in the Women's Spirituality Master's Program at CIIS New College in San Francisco, and finally at Sophia University in Palo Alto. Vicki is joining us from her home in Santa Cruz, California. And I want to just give a quick mention to, there's a third host of the show who can't be with us today. His name is Marlon Newcomb, and he is the creator of the Artemis Women in Action Film Festival, the world's first film festival to celebrate films about female action heroes, stunt women, sportswomen, and women warriors. He is currently the founder of 34 Circe, a company dedicated to telling tales of history, female heroes, great myths, and future world. 34 Circe produces the Make Matriarchy Great Again podcast, along with another podcast called The Parallax. And I feel like we could spend hours just digging into all of this that in your background. But Dawn and Vicki, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have you.
Our pleasure.
Wonderful. Well, I love to usually start with people just hearing a little bit about their spiritual backgrounds. And one of the reasons I like to do that is I find a couple of things. Oftentimes, the divine feminine is not part of our background and our upbringing formally, but she is there in like really subtle ways. Or there's like, something that we have to unlearn along our journey. So I like to kind of dig into that. So I'd love to start there. And I don't know, either one of you, feel free to raise your hand and go first.
Vicki, do you want to go?
Sure. I was raised Presbyterian. It didn't suit me. As a high school student, I walked across the street of my little town and joined the Methodist Church, my first kind of rebellion. I guess it was more progressive. I didn't even know why I was doing that, just that it felt more resonant. And then I ended up marrying an Air Force officer. Again, it didn't suit me, but I stayed in that marriage for 5 years. I had 2 baby girls, and in 1970, we moved to Colorado Springs, where he was a coach at the Air Force Academy. And in Colorado Springs, I opened to feminism. I found Sexual Politics, a book by Kate Millett. I don't know if the two of you have read it or are familiar with it. It was such a long time ago, but it was groundbreaking and absolutely life-changing for me. I had a routine of the base library sending over whatever came in from the New York Times bestseller list. And so I read whatever they sent me. And that book sitting on my coffee table in Colorado Springs was an act of rebellion. It was incredible. And so when I opened to feminism, it was total, and I considered it spiritual. But it was, it was at least 5 years after that I moved to Berkeley and really had my spiritual awakening to the goddess and really to the spiritual path. But all of that, happened really so quickly from 1965 when I graduated from high school. And then by 1975, we were moving to Berkeley. So in a decade, so many things happened. And I had a psychic tell me in Berkeley that although I thought I had found everything, had with feminism, she said, actually, you've just cracked the door and you're about to open it wide. Of course, I didn't have any idea what that meant at the time, but it turned out to be women's spirituality and making the Motherpeace cards, but so many other things that went into the Motherpeace cards, discovering shamanism and yoga and psychic healing and the ancient goddess. All of it just exploded. And so I've been on that path, studying and teaching all that material ever since. And it's a long time. I'm 75 now. What was I, 25 at the time?
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that must have been such an interesting, I'm just imagining what it might have been like, to be at that it seems to me like kind of the early stage of understanding women's spirituality and that sort of opening and what that was like. And also to be on that journey, at 25, I found my own way to this through parenthood, and I started a lot later. So, that sounds, I want to come back to that.
Okay.
But Dawn, I'd love to hear from you too, just a little bit about your spiritual background.
Sure. I like to tell people that I was raised by atheists, which is not quite wolves, but close. No, I was raised in an atheist household. Science was my father's God, is my father's God. And so when I had my teenage rebellion, I would sneak out of the house and go to church.
Oh my gosh, I love that. You might be the only person I've met whose teenage rebellion was to go to church.
But I went to services for various different churches around. I grew up in New England, in a small town in New England. So I went to, services for as many of the different churches that in town that I could get to. The closest that I found that really resonated was a Quaker service, a friend's meeting house. But none of it actually like really hit. I knew there was something there that I needed, but the way it was presented at the various churches that I went to never really quite hit. And then when I was in college, doing a lot of reading, I met some witchy people who were doing some pagan, light sort of things. And I stumbled across the book by Margot Adler, Drawing Down the Moon, which is an amazing book, study of all of the various different pagan groups that she found around the country. And about 30 pages into that book, I was like, this is what I am. That's me. So I finally had a name for what I felt, what resonated with me. And so worked with a small group of people. This is when I lived in Chicago now, after grad school, moved to Chicago and found a small group of people. And we formed a coven and did rituals on the Sabbats and things like that. But I also in Chicago got involved with the Native American community that was calling itself at the time the Rainbow Tribe. And this is from Ed McGaugh, Eagle Man, Ed McGaugh. He wrote a series of books about the Rainbow Tribe, and his philosophy was, he's Oglala of the Sioux Nation, and his philosophy was, if the Native Americans believe that their way of living with the world is the way that we should live, then why are they not teaching their ceremonies and spreading the word of what they do as broad as they can, as opposed to sort of keeping it. His experience had been that the people that he interacted with were keeping it inside their own tribe. It was sort of a secret, private thing just for Native Americans. So he created this idea of the Rainbow Tribe, and he went out and taught and led ceremony for non-Native peoples. And so I spent several years going to ceremony, sweat lodges, and I even had a vision quest, cried for a vision in the Sioux tradition of the Lakota people, which was an enormous honor. And so my spirituality sort of became a sort of blend of those two things. And now I describe it as sort of ecofeminism is my spirituality, that I follow the wheel of the year and try to walk in rhythm with the earth. The Sioux term is keep your feet on the good red road. And so try to live in balance and in harmony with all the living creatures on the earth.
Was that also Sun Bear and Betty LeDuc?
No, I never met them.
Really?
No. Yeah. Ed was kind of at the time was kind of a bit of an iconoclast, because he was sort of working primarily with non-Native peoples, and so he was kind of out there doing his thing, but the ideas that he spread definitely stayed with me. So yeah, and now of course I am a firm believer in reestablishing the matriarchy, and that is definitely goddess-centered. So very much in keeping with sort of the trajectory of my spiritual development.
Yeah, I wanted to, just say in terms of I'm not familiar with the Rainbow Tribe, and I could certainly see that going both ways. White people of European descent in this country have make that real bad track record of
appropriation
and trying to
commodification and all of that.
I could totally see it both ways. And I know for my own spiritual path, I think, also my family of people, listeners, if they've been listening and probably heard me mention this before, but my family of origin has, at least on my mother's side, has been in this country for close to 400 years. So the idea of going back to a tradition is very appealing, but I've got 7+ generations on this soil, so this is very much home. So that idea of wanting to reconnect with my personal ancestral traditions, but also recognizing that there's so much wisdom in this land and my ancestors have so much history in this land. Like, I can definitely see the convergence of those things. That makes a lot of sense to me.
In the 1970s, the AIM group, the American Indian Movement, and Native people that I came into contact with in the Bay Area, they were really clear, go back to your own spiritual roots, which at the time I felt, Presbyterian.
Right.
Like, really? You're going to make me do that? But of course, the work that I ended up doing with Maria Gimbutas and the ancient old European cultures is going back to my most ancient roots. And so it all made sense at some point, but it took a while. I had to really discover that we did have shamanistic roots.
Yes.
And matriarchal roots.
Yes. And I wonder, I mean, I can't even, Vicki, your body of work is just so expansive. Like, we cannot summarize it here, but I wonder if you could.
Well, I'm old. You accumulate experience.
Well, not everybody accumulates as much as you have. So good on you for using your time well.
I wonder, though, if you could talk to us a little bit about that time, in the 70s in Berkeley, when you were kind of moving into this women's spirituality movement, and what that was like for you, and what you were learning, and how that kind of opened things up for you.
Yes, I love to talk about that. I try to help my students have some sort of a feeling, for what went on during that decade. The decade of the 70s, for me, there'll never be anything like it. It was so open, and the culture seemed to completely support the freedom that we were experiencing and coming into and proselytizing about. Of course, that changed with 1980, by the time of Reagan, and then the 80s, and then finally the 90s. Forget it. The backlash was extreme. But at the time, honestly, we thought we were changing the world forever, and that it would never go back. It was so liberating for many more than just women, but women's liberation was extremely liberating and freeing for me. It was just wonderful. It was like coming home. I really did feel it as my spiritual path. And then the goddess, it was just, really like opening the door wider, like my psychic friend said. So the whole period of the 70s, the first half I spent in Colorado Springs being a women's health advocate. And I went to Irvine. I had a boyfriend out there, and I went out there with my children and stayed for a summer, and ended up in a self-help group with the speculums, and everybody looking at everybody's vaginas. It was totally earth-shaking. So I took a dozen speculums back to Colorado Springs to my women's liberation group and said, hey, this is what we need to do next. And we became a women's health group. And it was a really fruitful period. We, of course, marched for abortion and reproductive rights and all that. And then in 73, Roe versus Wade was passed. And so then by the end of 74 or 75, we opened our own clinic. And we had, it was just great. And the clinic went on for 10 years, even after I left Colorado Springs. It was very successful. The Women's Health Clinic, I think we called it, of Colorado Springs, Women's Health Service, that was it. And so that period of time was just very politically active for me. And then moving to Berkeley, it just completely burst open. And I was having Kundalini experiences and things that I had no background for, no way of really contextualizing what was happening for me. But I knew it was sacred. It was everything that happened was so extreme and so precious energetically and in my heart. So I didn't have a problem yielding to it. And all of that eventually, in a very surprising way, led to the Motherpeace images that I made with Karen Vogel. We thought we were writing a book, but it didn't turn. At a certain point, 78, I think, Merlin Stone's book came out.
Yes,
When God was a woman. Yeah. And she had spent 10 years researching her book. And Karen and I both felt like, that's the book we thought we were writing. So what are we doing? Meanwhile, someone brought a tarot deck, and I had never, ever seen tarot before. And I got obsessed with it and did it, for 6 months or something every day, all the time. And Karen got into it too. And my girls left. They were preteens at that point. They left to stay with their dad for a year. And so I was suddenly free. And I thought, well, what would it be like to make a tarot deck of my own? And I made the Six of Wands. And from there, and Karen said, I want to do this too. And I said, well, I don't know if you can, it's sort of my project. And she went off and created the Chariot card that was perfectly composed, and brought it back, 45 minutes later or something. And so off we went. We split the deck in half. And even before that, to be able to be in Berkeley, things in the 70s were so different. It was so easy to do everything. And it didn't take any money. And we were able to buy a house. The lending agent actually asked us in the interview, what we were thinking. And we said, well, we have degrees, but we don't want to work because we don't want jobs, because we want to write. But don't worry, we'll pay the mortgage. And he said, okay. And we signed up. Yeah, exactly. And so that's the way everything unfolded in the next 5 years for us to make the Motherpeace cards. And eventually, we tried to get them done in New York. It was a little hard. They didn't have the die cutting and everything. So we brought the project home to Berkeley, and we mortgaged our house, because in that 5-year period, the housing market had shot through the ceiling. So we were able to mortgage the house and print the cards. And then Harper came to me and said, do you want to write a book to go, and we'll publish it? And that was it. It took off so magically. Everything was, the Buddhists say, when the streams come together and the conditions are right, the treasure can be brought forth. And it was just like that for us. We knew that we were drawing the pictures, each of us, every day, but at the same time, it was as if it was happening through us, and it was even before people used all that language about channeling and everything, but we were definitely tapped in. And at some point, we decided these little people in the cards, for anybody who doesn't know the cards, little people. These little people were real. It was as if they were knocking on our door, and telling us that they wanted to be manifest, bring us in. Wow. And so we did that for a year, and then the rest of the story. And then I started teaching, as soon as the cards were out in the public, out in the world.
Wow. And where did Maria Gimbutas's where in that and along that journey did you find Maria? Well, it's been my impression that Maria, her work was kind of what opened this up for a lot of women.
For a lot of women, I think. But for me, I don't know when I first saw her book. She brought out a book in 1974, but we hadn't seen it. And we were going to the Berkeley Library and the Stanford Art Library and looking at old art, looking at the goddess images. We had, because let's see, we still didn't have Merlin Stone at that point. It was Elizabeth Gould Davis, a woman who isn't very well known, but she had written a book in 1971 called The First Sex.
Yes.
She told the story.
One of my podcasts, I believe it's Lucy Pierce, who founded Womancraft Publishing.
Huh.
This book really changed things for her too.
It was very life-changing, you know, because it was, people criticize it. It was intuitive. It wasn't, you know, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't scholarly, or it wasn't academic, but it was mind-blowing. And after that, I just understood that we had this prehistory we didn't know about. And when we moved to Berkeley in 1976, Karen and I were dedicated to, you know, researching that material and discovering what was it, and what was it like when women had power. What was it like? I mean, that was our big question, and we were very interested in female sexuality and how was it when women were free. And so that was our quest, and that's what led us on this long, you know, not so long, I guess, journey to the Motherpeace, and then to the rest of the work.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, it was a fantastic opening. And it was shared, you know, in Berkeley, in the Bay Area at that time. The feminist poetry circuit was really happening, and the bookstores, you know, feminists in the 70s basically built institutions, and we had a kind of parallel world for a decade. It was thrilling, and some of us were separatists, not all, but Karen and I definitely had a 5-year period of separatism. There wasn't a man in our house for 5 years. And it was, you know, it was refreshing. I mean, I missed men by the end of that 5 years, but, you know, it was a wonderful, like a retreat. And the way that we were in our household and raising my daughters was just very woman-centered before I really had any experience of that in the world.
Wow, it sounds amazing. And I Dawn, I'm guessing you probably feel the same way, but I know without a doubt that I wouldn't be here now without that period of time, and like your work and all of that opening, you know, this wouldn't even be possible. So
yeah, thank you. That's,
yeah, absolutely.
In America, we obliterate our history. So many women don't know what came before because they don't want us to, you know.
Yes. Yeah, they don't want that information in front and center.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that I have talked with Vicki about is, you know, of all the advances that were made by women in the 70s in spirituality, in politics, in business, in all this sort of thing, all of these forward steps were taken. And it feels like in every area except spirituality, that ground has been lost. But women's spirituality and the goddess movement and all of that sort of thing is an area that has continued. It has not only survived, but it has thrived, because that is a message that I feel anyway is so resonantly truthful, that once you learn it and once you open to it, it's not something that can ever be taken away from you. The understanding of God as mother, of the goddess, and is so fundamentally right. I think
so
that yes, yeah.
Especially for, I think, for those of us who there's just that gaping absence, you know, like we like once you see it. I mean, I grew up in a Southern Baptist household, so you know, there's certainly no naming of. I mean, Mary didn't even exist, you know. Like there was no. So when it's named, it's like it's a very visceral thing, right? Like you can feel it in your body of like, oh my gosh, I had a hole here, and I didn't even know there was a hole here. And
yes, exactly.
And then it fills with love.
Yes,
because that is what the goddess brings, is that love. And once that hole is filled with love, it's like, oh, I am never having a hole there again. Never again.
Well,
Yeah.
and John, I wanted to ask you, so I know you talked about, aha, I am a pagan. Is that kind of where the goddess came into your, I mean, is that how you sort of embraced the goddess, or was she just, I know in some pagan traditions she's there, but she's beside the god, right?
Right. It is a egalitarian lord and lady. Yeah. Yeah, for me it was mostly the awareness of the goddess and the idea of naming divine as female that really came, that I was able to put a name to. Oh, that's paganism. Okay. Now I have, when people say, what are you? I know. But mother of all or mother of none, I think, is a phrase that really turned the corner for me. It's like, this is a divine, a concept of the divine that isn't mired in judgment and shame and requirements for obedience and that sort of thing. This is a divine that loves you. That's it.
Yes.
Loves you. Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, no strings attached. No string, loves you. Yeah.
Right.
And my personal familial situation was was very much like my father was the judgmental, harsh, cruel figure. And I was lucky enough to have an amazing relationship with my mother, who was was absolutely my favorite person in the world. And so to me, it also had that extra like layer of resonance of, this is how my life plays out, that, the judgment and the shame come from the father figure, but the love and acceptance and pride in me, just like I knew she was proud of me. And that was not ever anything I felt from the father figure. So it really was like, oh, yes, this is where I am now, and this is where I will always be.
I love that.
May I go back to the Maria Gimbutas question?
Yes,
because
please.
One of the things I'm doing right now is I'm about to do an online course that I've been working on really all summer. I'm excited about it, and I'm rereading. I reread all of her books on the goddess so that I could sort of synthesize them for all the women I know who are interested but haven't read her books. And it's a lot to read all her books, but it's worth it. And I came to understand about her that she's like a Dakini or an avatar, that she came into our lives in a way that was not just thrilling in a scholarly way, which it was, but also in a spiritual way. She was like a spiritual magnet because she had grown up in Lithuania and had all of this folk background. When she was born, her mother took her to the ocean, took her to the Baltic Sea and dipped her. They were steeped in the old religion, even though it was Europe. And then on the other hand, her parents were resistance intelligentsia. They were the epicenter in Vilnius for that resistance movement to the series of occupations. So there's something in her background that made her the way she was. And for us, it was like when I did find her work, and when her book Gods and Goddesses of Old Europe was redone in the early 1980s as Goddesses and Gods of Old Europe, because it was more appropriate. We discovered her and began to coalesce around her in a certain way. I really feel that she became a kind of a lightning rod for our nascent movement that was developing, and many of us knew each other by then. in the Bay Area. And so we weren't unknown, but so we knew we were doing something collectively. But when she really took up residence, you know, in our lives, it changed everything, and it anchored it, it grounded it in reality. We were having circles and doing rituals and things, but she put the goddess on the map and made it substantive. I was going to say substantial, but really more like it gave it gravity.
Legitimacy?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Made it
Yes.
real. We weren't just, it wasn't a feminist fantasy.
Yes.
She was digging it up from the ground and sharing it, you know. She was a hard scientist, but she was also, you know, a goddess woman. She was very pleased to be invited into our circles and became part of that. She was a wonderful paradoxical mix, a perfect teacher.
Yes, I think so. In looking at her books and just the iconographical record that she put together. I mean, you can sit around and debate, like, is this a goddess? Is this? But you cannot. I mean, you cannot argue with just the sheer amount of evidence she amassed for the divine feminine in Europe. I mean, it's right there. Like it's
But they
amazing.
do.
They do argue with it, even though it's clear.
It is so clear. And I did for listener, I'll put it in the show notes for listeners that are interested. I think it was 2021. Joan Marler was on the show and was talking also.
Good.
She edited one of Maria, I think one or two of Maria Gimbutas's books.
Yeah.
So I'll make sure.
And also she was her protege.
Yes.
She is her protege. She continues the work of Maria Gimbutas, and she just finished her PhD dissertation, which is a defense of Maria and the story of her life, and then how archaeology received her, and what's happening now that the DNA evidence recently has proven her to be correct. So now, no matter how much the archaeologists deny her reality, it's undebatable.
Yes, and for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, I just check the show notes. I'll put an article in here for you.
Good.
I already feel like this conversation could be hours long, so
Absolutely.
I'm already like, you're both gonna have to come back. I do want to make sure that we talk about your podcast. I was pretty excited to find out about it. So tell me how this came about, and I'd love to know what's the whole significance of 34 Circe. Yeah, tell me all the things.
Sure. Well, Sean and I had been working together on film and VR project called Infinite Realm.
And that's virtual reality, right?
Virtual reality, exactly. Okay. Yeah, we're both out here in LA, film capital of the world. Yeah. And but we were very interested in creating projects that are, the things that Hollywood is afraid of, really woman-strong, female-centric, non-apologetic projects. And so he created this, it's his brainchild, this virtual reality world called the Infinite Realm, where certain women can go, and in this virtual reality, they are steeped in the forgotten history of priestesses, queens, women of power throughout history. And so we were shooting it with 3D cameras to be a VR experience of a VR world. And then the pandemic happened. And I know that Vicki and Sean had some communication around this same time, because Vicki had made this connection with the Sarmatians. And so this is Amazon research, and their bent knee posture resonating with the Dakinis in India. And Sean saw that and reached out to Vicki, and the two of them started talking. And then we met in person like November of 2019, I think it was.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, for the first time we met in person. And of course, as soon as he said, "So I've been talking to this woman named Vicki Noble," I was like, "You've been talking to Vicki Noble?" How? Because I'd seen her books, and in all of my goddess work, and for 20 years I've been aware of her as a leader in the women's spirituality movement and a teacher. And so we met in November of 2019, and then of course the world shut down. And so Sean actually, came up with the idea of, like, since we're stuck in our houses, let's start a podcast and let's talk about the things we're going to film when the world opens up again. And that sort of shifted into talking about film projects, to talking about the kind of research that we were interested in, the kind of things that Vicki had been looking at with Maria Gambutas. And so we started reaching out to a bunch of scholars about Amazon research and matriarchy research. And that's sort of how Make Matriarchy Great Again became the focus of the podcast.
And in a way, it's so fortuitous that the pandemic locked us down for a while, because I was traveling so much in those days that I wouldn't have probably said yes. And I was thrilled when Sean contacted me, because it was unbelievable. Here was this man, and he had read The Double Goddess. Hardly anybody's read The Double Goddess, as far as I know, but he had. And he was so into, he actually knew Janine Davis Kimball and the Amazon research a little bit, but he loved my research, and he resonated with it, and he understood it. And he had done a little bit of research of his own into some of the movements of people that I talked about, from Anatolia to the Etruscans, and the language connections. And so we were just sparking, and it was wonderful. And then we tried a podcast. I think we did a podcast before the pandemic, because I came down to see you guys. And then I think we might have started, but it was the pandemic that was like, okay, why not?
Yeah.
I'd never even listened to a podcast at that point, so I was clueless, and it was just the perfect form for me. These two, Sean and Dawn, got my work onto the internet in a way that I would never have done on my own. So it's been very auspicious and kind of magical unfolding, the same as the Motherpeace. The streams come together, the conditions are right, this thing happens that you had no idea was going to be possible.
Never. It was not on my list of things to do.
No.
So it just arrived.
And now it's the central things in my life. I'm very dedicated to it. It's been absolutely wonderful. It forces my coherence in terms of my own research and thinking about what these things mean after all these years, and so on. And so it's been thrilling, and we have so much fun.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Well,
and it's
I was going to say, tell me about the format, because I know it's a little different. You do some interviews, right? And then you're also discussing books and
right. So we sort of took as our guide post Heidegger Abendroth's work on matriarchy, who, if your listeners have not checked her out, hagia.de, I believe, is the website, hagia.de. And she has an Institute of Matriarchal Studies that's been, around for decades. And so she has this wonderfully succinct and comprehensive definition of what is matriarchy, right? Because most people, when you say matriarchy, they think patriarchy, except with women in charge.
Totally.
Right.
Yes.
The exact same.
God in a dress.
Yes, God in a dress. Exactly. Yeah. Whereas actual historical matriarchies, and some still exist, some are, have been destroyed, but actual matriarchy is egalitarian.
Mhm.
It is not women ruling and repressing men. It is men and women as equals. But there is so the spiritual. There are four aspects, right? The spiritual, the political, the economic, and the social or cultural. And so the spiritual aspect of a matriarchy is a goddess worshiping idea. So the idea of the earth is our mother, the goddess is the divine figure in a matriarchy. So an understanding of divine as female. And then the other aspects, the political, the idea of consensus, societies of peace that govern by consensus.
Instead of war.
Instead of war, exactly. And then Genevieve Vaughn, who you've had as a guest on your podcast, the idea of the gift economy, that the economic arrangement of a matriarchy is there isn't currency, it's gifts, and it's gift giving in response to need. So if someone has and someone does not have, then the gift is given to need. So if anyone has enough to survive, everyone has enough to survive.
And the model for it is the mother and child.
Right.
Because our infants are helpless and cannot survive without parenting, and it's usually the mother. And so it's that freely given gift of the mother to the child, or the parental figure to the child. You don't expect exchange.
Right. It's not a barter system.
Right.
It's a gift system. You give because there is need.
And what Genevieve has said that's so important to our work is that everybody receives the gift. Boys and girls receive the gift of survival and nurture from this parental figure, who is usually female. And boys are taught to move away from it, to go in another direction, otherwise, which is unnatural. And so the whole male dominance thing is so unnatural. And I just think that's so valid for our work.
Yeah,
so
Max.
To understand.
Yeah, Max Dashew's phrase, patriarchy is a maladaptation.
Yes.
Is just brilliant.
Yeah.
It is a maladaptation. It is.
Absolutely.
It's going away from nature. And then the idea of decision making by consensus, of sharing of resources. So in our podcast, we sort of take that as our model for the kind of topics that we're going to cover. So we have several series. We have our main episodes where we speak with people like Vicki and other scholars, where we talk about the science and the scholarship behind matriarchy, aspects of matriarchy and Amazons in history. Amazons, and this is Vicki's phrase, the idea of Amazons as the resistance fighters for the matriarchy, that when matriarchy was being destroyed by the patriarchal invading forces, and the women's powers being suppressed and removed, and women were being turned into forced brides, aka sexual slavery, that the Amazons were sort of the last defenses of the matriarchy, taking up arms to desperately try to maintain their way of life, which is both beautiful and tragic.
Yes.
So that's sort of our main strain. But then we also love to go into other directions. So we have a couple of sort of goddess-centric series. One is called In Praise of the Goddess, where where we choose a goddess from a pantheon, any of the pantheons around the world, and we sort of do a deep dive on the history of that goddess's worship and sort of the current resonances of that goddess. And then we have the Feminine Divine series, where we speak with individual peoples about the presence of a feminine divine in their lives. And we've spoken with a rabbi, a conservative rabbi, woman rabbi, who talks about the Shekinah. We've spoken with Caitlin Shetler, who is an amazing poet, and she is recovering from her upbringing in evangelical Christianity, which similar to baptism is like the presence of any female, even in close proximity to the male god, is completely wiped out of the conversation. So we've spoken with a couple of different people about the feminine divine in their lives. And then we have our pop culture, where we look at sort of like, feminist and matriarchal little burblings that come up into the popular culture. And we take a look at those and talk about them. And there's one more series that we've only done, I think, one episode on that we need to do more of, which is The War Against the Goddess, where we talk about modern scholarship that is attempting to debunk Maria Gimbutas and others like her, who posit pockets of female power in the past. And they are actively trying to either find or make up alternative theories that show that men were always in charge forever and always will be.
And it's very postmodern. Like, just because this figurine has breasts doesn't mean she's meant to be a woman.
Right.
Which is sort of co-opting the the gender, the motions that are being made in gender fluid circles now, taking those ideas, which are meant to be empowering for all, no matter what your gender representation is, and using those theories, flipping them, doing the patriarchal Aikido, as Sean calls it, taking that energy, flipping it, and using it to further oppress women's history.
Yes. Slightly different, but you're making me think of something that I came across when I was reading about the so-called Venus figurines early on. Perhaps you've seen this. Like, I read somewhere that someone had a theory that this isn't actually a goddess. It is the dissected brain of particular animals. Like, it's not a goddess. That's a dissected brain of a frog. If you look at the frog's brain and you turn it this way, it looks just like this abstract goddess. It's like, oh my goddess, you will go to any length.
They will contrive anything.
It's wild. It really is.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing we're talking about. And then the last series that is Sean steps out of, because God bless him, goddess bless him, he doesn't want to be that dude talking about women's bodies with any sort of authority or understanding. The last series is called Being a Bad Martha, which is a reference to The Handmaid's Tale, but it's where we talk about the things that society considers gross or unseemly. So we talk about periods. We talk about, the messiness of giving birth. We talk about menopause. We talk about Vicki and I just interviewed Mary Lou Shin, where we talked about women's blood mysteries and all of the sort of spirituality that surrounds the menstrual cycle and, women's blood. And so in all of that is all held together, pinned together by the idea of matriarchy.
Oh, I love that. I'm so into this conversation, and I'm so aware that we're running out of time. And I really want to continue it, but I want to ask you. Let me ask you at least one last question here. I'm curious. So and especially Vicki, you've been doing this work for quite a while now. Like, is this whole matriarchy thing possible for us? Like, are you filled with hope as you continue these conversations? Are you like, where are you? And I'd love to hear from both of you on that.
You know, what I do is to constantly stay truthful with myself, that I'm really living in two realities. I mean, one is this matriarchal world that I've been living in, you know, in a personal bubble for 30, 40 years easily. But the other, and it's, I don't know, you know, what can happen with that in the mainstream, especially the current mainstream in our culture. But the other track, and also science, I feel we've gone so far with the climate crisis.
Yes.
And our pollution and all the chemicals, and just with science, we've gone so far that we are not going to be able to fix it. And I've really come to terms with that in some way. I'm watching it unfold. I don't believe there's much we can do. I mean, everybody should do everything they can, but I don't hold a lot of hope for it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I know that the earth is so regenerative, that the body of the earth is so regenerative that Lake Erie came back to life when it was declared dead. You know, we have regenerative capacities we don't understand and don't know about. And that's true in our bodies. I was a hands-on healer for 30 years, and we did incredible work with spontaneous remissions and things like that. So anything is possible at any moment. And I just feel like probably it's not happening. You know, the materialism of our culture is so extreme at this point, and the worship of science. And so that's probably where we're going. We're going over the cliff. But on the other hand, there is this capacity that Mother Earth and the Mother Goddess have. When I say that, I mean nature, you know, I mean all of the universe and all of the forces and all of the energies. We just aren't cognizant enough of those invisible, powerful, high frequency forces. And they know more than we do, and it's an intelligence that is greater than our own. And so that's where I put my hope. And when, you know, when the fires happened here in Santa Cruz, I had a vision of the Black Dakini. I had a vision. I hardly have real visceral, graphic 3D visions. And I saw her very large over the forest, over the fire, just like a demonstration of her power. And then I watched her suck up the fire into herself, you know, and they managed to put out the fire. Now, you know, I could never prove that those two things are related, but I definitely felt calm that night. That before that, we were thinking of leaving town because it was so frightening. And when I saw that, we were chanting to the Black Dakini, my daughter and a friend. And when I saw that, I said, okay, we don't have to go. We don't have to go. I do think, you know, Mother Earth will take care of this whole thing, that it's out of our hands now in a certain sense. But she will do that in a very loving and compassionate way. And we need it because we're too stupid to do the things we need to do. You know, we're too entrenched in our conditioning and who we are, and we just haven't made the appropriate choices as a collective. And now it's too late in that sense of how we could have stopped it. So that's a long way of saying I don't know. but I'm compelled to do this Gimbuddhist course, you know, and I know it's because I believe we all need to have the matriarchy in our consciousness. We need to know, not that it's a fantasy of some kind or an alternate reality, but that we have lived it, that our human evolution depended on it for 200 years, 200,000 years, we were matriarchal, or probably longer. The bonobos are matriarchal, and we're a lot like them. So I just think, come on, we need to know this. We need to know it, and then we'll be able to, take the next step and be able to go through whatever processes we have to go through at this historic moment.
Yeah, understanding that it is a viable option.
That it's the only viable option.
I would agree 100%. Yeah. Yeah.
So whether we can get, women into the government and in a position of power, who knows? Obviously, we're really not, not very good at that in our country.
And will that structure stay? And is that going to serve us in the long term? I mean, there are big
Right.
questions, right? Who
Right,
knows?
right.
I mean, because that whole thing was pretty patriarchal in and of itself. I mean, even our modern imagining of democracy, if we really go back to it, it wasn't really a democracy. We just
it wasn't really ever democracy. So why are we even stuck on that? Yeah.
What about you, Dawn?
Vicki, do you want to bounce before I answer this question?
Okay?
Yeah, you need to run to. She has a doctor's appointment. So
thank you so much for joining us,
yes,
Vicki. I'd love to have you.
Having me.
Yeah, I'd love to have you back. I will make sure, send me your information about your course, and I'll make sure to put it in the show notes so people will know about it.
Thank you. I will. Thank you so much. It was really fun, and I can't stand that I have to leave.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. There we go.
Yes.
Yeah, I knew she had to get to a doctor's appointment, so I figured just let her exit gracefully on that beautiful thought.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm curious how you feel too, as you've been having these conversations over the last few years, like I hate to say, do you have hope? I don't know if that's the word, but where does that put you in a frame of mind in terms of what is possible for us, I guess?
Well, meeting Vicki and understanding and like seeing how this women's spirituality aspect of, the feminism of the 70s and the upheaval and the remaking of the 70s as the aspect that has continued. And then, are you familiar with Octavia Butler?
Yes.
The writer? Yeah.
Oh, gosh, yes.
So that was a pandemic read for me, the parable of the sower and the parable of the talents.
Yes, and Octavia Butler, for those who aren't familiar, I'll put her in the show notes too. She was a Black science fiction writer who was incredibly ahead of her time. It's actually, I don't know if you felt this, Dawn, but reading the parable of the sower, where we are at this moment in time, it was sort of like making the hair stand up on my arms of like, wow, she really knew where we were headed. It's
frighteningly prescient, of one possible future.
Yes.
So the concept in the parable of the sower that her main character comes up with is this idea that if you want to introduce an idea that can last beyond your lifetime, it has to be done through religion. That is the mold, the container, the engine for an idea that can expand beyond you. And I'd actually run into this idea years and years and years ago at a theater makers retreat in Georgia, of all places. But this idea that if we created a physical sequence, that we all gathered together to do this same physical sequence every morning, and then we taught it to the others in our village. And everyone in the village learned this physical sequence and passed it on and kept teaching it, that 1,000 years from now, it would be a religion. So it was really Octavia Butler that crystallized this idea for me about, if we want matriarchy, the best container to hold it is the women's spirituality movement. Because that idea of goddess and the the undeniability of that idea of goddess is, I think, the only way we can carry matriarchy beyond the next administration and the next administration and our latest election and the latest, decision of the Supreme Court. All of those things are constantly ebbing and flowing for women's rights. We take 2 steps forward, we take 2 steps back. We take 3 steps forward, we take 3 steps back. It never seems to be a gain that we can hold on to.
Yes.
But in the context of a spiritual belief, it is undeniable. So that is sort of where I pin my hope.
Yes.
And also why I am in the process of founding the Church of the Clitoris.
Oh my gosh.
Because
okay, well now we have to stay long enough for you to explain this. You have to.
So the Church of the Clitoris, in brief, because it's still in process, is it's an institution founded for the physical, spiritual, social, emotional, sexual, and mental health of women. All those who define themselves as women. It doesn't mean it is a woman-only space. It means it is a space where the focus is on women. Mm-hmm. It is a goddess space, absolutely. It is a matriarchal space. It is an egalitarian, consensus-based place of love. Mm. But what it really is it's a new form of a 1970s women's consciousness raising group. Because our sermons are about things like we did some on the blood mysteries. We do things on the importance of sleep. Here, let me take a look at my sermon list on what we've done. We've done child marriage laws. We've done a sermon on child marriage laws. We've done a sermon on asking for help. We've done a sermon on physical pain and how that affects your body. We've done a sermon on girl crushes. I want to do a sermon on gossip. Like, how has gossip been treated throughout history, and what is its purpose in our lives? That kind of thing. So we do touch on spiritual ideas, definitely, but it is very much about our health as women and all of the different forms that health can take, and providing a place for women to focus on their own growth, their own nurturing, their own self-care, their care of others, learning how to listen to other women and support other women in a safe space. It's a charged word,
sure.
But it is a mediated space. We call it clitoral space. It is a mediated space where growth and health are the focus. So for me, that was sort of this is my latest way to advance these same ideas that I've been advancing in my feminist activist work throughout my life. A lot of it in my younger years was in the arts, because media is unbelievably powerful in changing the conversation and affecting our preconceived notions of just about everything in our lives. So media, I think, is a very powerful tool for women to advance the needs that we have in our lives and to help overthrow the patriarchy. Let's be honest. But I think these consciousness raising spaces, this idea of creating space for women to talk about women's issues, is something that we haven't really seen since the 70s. It's become the public conversation. And we still have it in like book clubs and wine clubs and things like that. We call it other things. But for me, I've always worked best in groups of women. Everything that I do, I always find the most advanced is possible in groups, working with groups of women.
Yeah.
So this is another way of creating a group of women to benefit us, to make a good space for women in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I was thinking too that, just a very literal sense, Church of the Clitoris, like you're rooting spirituality in the body, like in the body. And to me, that is like, okay, well, that has staying power, first of all, because we all have bodies and we're going to
Right.
continue to be in bodies. It's the counterbalance to this focus of transcendence, which I think is how we've gotten to this awful place with our planet, right? And it,
Yeah.
um,
That
if
that someone from afar is going to save us.
right, and we translate that through our politics, through everything. We project it onto our billionaires who are going to get us off to Mars or wherever because we've
Right.
destroyed this planet. Like we, yeah. So it roots us back here, and I think it creates a way to see the sacredness of life in general. If we can find it in ourselves,
Mhm.
then I think we start to see it in the world around us too, and that which we hold sacred, we want to protect and
Yes.
preserve and keep.
Yes.
So,
Yes. And foster and share.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
Plus, there is the scientific fact that the clitoris is the only organ in any human body whose sole function is pleasure.
well, that's a huge thing in and of itself,
And
right?
if that isn't a divine gift, I don't know what is.
Such a powerful message, too, right? Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, my gosh. Well, I'm in. I'm in
All
this.
right. Wonderful.
Oh, my
Become
gosh.
one of the clitorati.
Would love to be one of the clitorati. That sounds amazing. Oh, my gosh. Dawn, this has been such a joy. I'm so glad we were able to do this. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm sorry Sean wasn't able to be here.
Yes, he sends his best wishes and his apologies.
Mm,
The forces of capitalism
I understand.
made made it impossible for him to be here. So
I understand. Well, and I will be sure to put in the show notes how people can find and listen to Make Matriarchy Great Again, and anything else you want to share, pass along with me. It's to me, and I'll make sure I get it in the show notes. And yeah, I thank you so much for this. This is so much fun.
absolutely, thank you.
And thanks to all of you for listening, as always. If you like this show, you can subscribe to it. You can give it 5 stars, tell your buddies about it. You can do all of those things if you so desire. And until next time, you take good care of yourself, and I will be with you again very soon.